Alo me kakua poroa o maluhia.
O Emily.
Mahalo ke hui ana. Mau mana o kumau kia pure. Welcome everybody. This is episode 2
of season 3 of Hawaiian at Home, the podcast about learning Hawaiian at home and being a Hawaiian at home, home being wherever you are.
Beautiful. That was very well said.
I was kind of proud of that too. It just came out. Okay, so this episode we're going to be talking about resources, which is kind of where we left off on last episode. After our story, we named some of the resources. So today we thought we would dive in a little deeper to these resources, give you some stories about how we found these resources and how we use them. And here we go.
That's it.
Yeah. So the very first resource that I remember, so I guess, memories can be different. We definitely went on the same path, but remember things a lot differently. So I'll be sharing a lot of resources I specifically remember using, and Malu's going to be sharing ones that stood out more so to him. The very first resource that you remembered using, go.
I don't remember.
Okay. The very first resource
There's a lot of them.
I remember using, you can think about yours as I share mine, was actually Kapuke a Moramona, because we both learned our second language while we were living in other countries. So I was living in the Philippines and I learned Hiligaynon, and the way that we were taught to learn another language at that time was we took our scriptures in English and we took our scriptures in Hiligaynon and we read them side by side. And that was kind of one thing that we did consistently that helped me learn Hiligaynon. So when we were like, let's learn another language, that was the first thing that came to my mind was, okay, let's get our scriptures in English and get scriptures in Hawaiian. We'll buy a book in Hawaiian and then we will read them side by side. And I think there's a few reasons why I think this worked. The biggest reason, number one, being for me was that I was already familiar with the scriptures because I had been reading them my whole life. So then when I went to read the Hawaiian version, I could remember I know this story, I know the scripture, I know it's talking about these sorts of things. So I think that was helpful. I mean, obviously, if you don't feel comfortable or you don't read scriptures, finding things that are maybe similar in content so that you already have the context of what you're reading. That was the first one for me.
Well, I think it's a good tip. It's difficult to find the kind of material because there's not a lot of material out there where you have English.
Harry Potter.
Yeah, you have a few books, yeah, but yeah, for the most part, I think the Bible, Kapaipala, Kapuka, Moramona, those two for sure, and those have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
The question was the first resource.
Yeah, the
right?
first resource. But I do want to say with that, because you're saying Kapaipala, the Bible is a great resource, and I think just blanket statement, whether you're religious or not, these are still really good resources to use in learning a language because the missionaries were the first ones to come to Hawaii to transcribe and write down Hawaiian language and learn Hawaiian. That's some of our best resources we have. It goes back to the very, very first written Hawaiian recordings that we have. So it's a good resource. I would just wanted to throw that in.
For me, it was the same one for Hawaiian at least, right?
Yeah, if you remember it that way.
Kupuka Moramona was the first thing. I don't know. She has that experience of where she could read both books, one in English, one in Hawaiian, and kind of do that for a little bit. To be honest, she didn't do it very long. Because I kind of took over and started to lead. I think we talked about that in the first episode. But that was, I read it, but I didn't use it in that way. And I just kind of would read through it and learn vocabulary here and there. The book I mostly used was called The Hawaiian Language Book, a complete grammar book, if I'm not mistaken. The writer is P. Judd, I'm pretty sure. Done in the 1800s. Is it 1930s?
You and your dates.
I'm not very good with that. Maybe it's 1930s, I want to say. It's pretty old. It's not the 1800s. That book had a lot of basic structure. So that's how I learned structure. So that I would spend most days reading it. And some of my early memories of using that book were, I worked at a call center at the time. And sometimes there would be, some days really busy where you you're getting calls back to back. But some days, you'd have minutes in between. And so I actually would have the book out on my desk, and after I would get off of a call, I would just pour through it. So on some of those days, I could just really basic and dig into it. Pukea Mormona would be on the side too. And yeah, I mean, those were the earliest. I was trying to get as much as I could at work. After work, I would break the book out again.
Yeah.
Yeah, just any minute that I could spare, I spent digging into those books.
And we got those books from the school library that I was attending, BYU in Provo, Utah. I just went to the language section, and they have a lot of languages.
Which I found very surprising.
There. Yeah, so I just checked out as many as I could on my card of Hawaiian language, because I was like, I don't know which ones.
Yeah.
Well, we had no
best,
idea which one.
Yeah,
so I just grabbed them all, brought them home, and I remember for sure Malu looked at a lot of them more than I did, but I do remember there was I think you recommended one to me, and I would take it with me to the gym sometimes, and as I was like on the treadmill, I would like look at a page.
Which book was that? Was it a smaller book?
It was a thinner one.
It must have been that book I was using.
Yeah,
the Hawaiian language book.
I don't think you would have recommended. Anyways,
Spoken Hawaiian was a bigger book, that's why.
Yeah, it was a thinner one, and I liked that one because it was very concise. It got right to the point of everything and didn't have a lot of like flourishes. So that's kind of how we learned grammar.
Structures and vocabulary
from
came
a
from
book.
those two books.
And books are good. Books are really good for the grammar and those sorts of things, because they usually, you can see it, they lay it out, they switch it for you into English of this is like the verb and adjective. I had to teach him what an adjective was and a verb and a noun.
Not because I didn't pay attention really in school, I just missed a lot of it. Well, I didn't pay attention that much either when I was there.
Don't give yourself that.
But yeah, it was mostly just because I missed those lessons.
So we have a lot of memories of like using the books to get like a basic foundation of structures, and I mean some of the very and I would say, and you can correct me or share your thoughts, like in Hawaiian there's kind of like some basics that as long as you know those and they're not too complicated, you can really get along. Okay. Well, I just mean there's not a lot of exceptions like with ua and anyways, I can whatever. Simpler the basic sentences, you can get them from a grammar book, and if you practice and you get those, you can have a lot of conversations with just those basic sentence structures, which is kind of where we were the first year. We're gonna do an
example of this?
Sure. I remember after a couple months of like reading books and learning, we started to try to use what we knew. So it'd be like, if we wanted to go to the store, it'd be like, this is how we probably said it, like, ehede ana we ika store. Like that's probably how, if I remember back, how we used it at that time. And then we just tried to like add in the other words we didn't know, say it faster, get the pronouns right, those sorts of things. I specifically remember the store one. It was like one of my favorite things to say to you. It was like, but it probably didn't sound like that back then.
It was a lot slower probably and sounded worse.
Yeah. Do you want to? Okay.
More to that? No, I mean that was. We would try to use it as best we could, but it was very slow going, and
so those are
books. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but patience,
Yeah, so those are the books, and then next we also started at the same time doing videos, not doing videos, but like watching videos. So I remember
a little different.
I remember the first videos we watched being Kula Yuvi, which was done by Kamehameha Schools.
I think so.
Yeah. And you remember you want
to
share
videos?
No. Just let's talk about Kula
Yuvi. Any experience? I mean, once we found them, I just remember watching them until we went through it completely.
I see that you're struggling with the memory lane, going down memory lane. Like, no, just that you're like, I remember it. Like, I remember we would like set it up on our kitchen counter. We'd be in our like kitchen.
Yeah, those details I don't know.
And we'd be like watching it together, and it would have those. What are they called? Vignettes. Vignette.
Yeah.
The vignette.
Which I had never heard in my life.
They were like little skits. That they did all in Hawaiian.
So they would teach you like a structure of this is how you. Is that how they did it?
Yeah, they would.
It would be a few sentences, and then in the vignette or the short film was a few minutes long, you would hear that structure at least once.
Yeah.
But then the rest, it was all in Hawaiian. There was a whole scenario in Hawaiian.
Yeah.
So to be honest, the majority of it was just like completely over our heads, and we just try to wait
For
to
the
hear that structure.
Yeah. But I really liked Kula Yuvi, and I still really like. Oh, I don't watch it anymore, but I would still recommend it very highly because it's engaging, it's fun to watch, and really well done in like the.
In the 90s, this was.
Yeah, it was really well done. So Kula Yuvi was one of the first video things we started learning from and watching, and I would still recommend that to anyone learning for sure. Any other videos that you?
Anything I could find, I can't recall. To
On
be
what?
honest,
YouTube?
I would just look up YouTube and find anything. It became very apparent very quickly. Like some videos I'd find and realize, oh, this person's not a very good speaker, so I would immediately stop watching that and find ones where I could tell somebody had a better command of the language. So I guess for any video content, I can't really remember, but it was similar to how I would have my book at work and then at my house. I would take it everywhere. Is any spare time I had to find a video, I got tired of reading, I would switch gears and say, I want to listen to something. I'm tired of listening. Let me write something. So that's kind of how I balanced out learning, but yeah.
Yeah. And as we're sharing like these first resources we started using, we also started to talk to each other. So if you have someone, that's a resource, talking to someone. Anyone who's interested in learning with you is a resource, becomes a resource. But I also want to point out, you can also talk to yourself, which is not really something I did, but this guy over here did that quite often. Like I can remember multiple times, not even like that long ago, I'll like come home and he's like taking a shower and I can hear him talking to himself in Hawaiian. And, like at first I used to like wonder what he's doing. Now I just know. What were you doing? What are you doing?
Hey, I mean, I think a lot of people do it. I have no shame. It's the same as thinking in your head. It's just now you're thinking out loud. Yeah. What was I doing? And sometimes it was just I was trying to remember a structure, so I just repeat it. Right? If it was like a past tense structure, I remember those early on was just like the first one was ua here au, and then I go, how do you say she went? Ua here oia, I'm pretty sure. And then I would just go down the rabbit hole while I showered. And then you'd bust me like, hello? Is somebody in here? It's me. And myself. Yeah.
I feel like you also there got to a point where you started to work on your like intonation and sound, and so I would hear you almost.
That was later.
It was later, but I would hear you talking to yourself, and you were almost like mimicking. It sounded like you were trying to mimic someone.
Yeah, well, that's something I had done since I was really young, is mimicking people. You want that story?
It sounds so. Doesn't sound.
Yeah, for anybody that has seen the film Master of Disguise, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I forget how old I was. I was probably a teenager when I saw that film. But essentially, there's a guy in it who, as a kid, every time he would hear an accent, he would immediately start to mimic it. But it was perceived as something very rude, right? Somebody's trying to talk to you, and then you start mimicking the way that they talk. And when I saw that film, I was like, this is almost exactly what I would do as a kid. So I found it very relatable. But since I was a kid, I had an interest in language. So that's kind of where I started. I mean, I would hear people speak in German or with a German accent or with an Irish accent. And then I just thought it sounded cool. I thought it was very interesting. So I would try to do it myself. I would just maybe ponilas, stuff like that. And
there you go.
With Hawaiian, it was the same. I started to find these recordings of native speakers. And when I would hear myself saying like, oh, mamake au e here I ka haleku ai me ka wahine. And then I would hear them say, mamake no hoi maku here iri ra, hoi me ira lo, hane ira me kia me. And I was like, that does not sound at all the way that I sound, which is an issue, I thought. And it is, by the way. So once I figured that out, which was easier for me to do because I had learned a language prior to that, and I had native speakers tell me that there was a difference between the way I spoke and my companion, they call them, right? The friend that I would go around with. missionaries, right? So
Yeah.
I remember them giving that comparison of, oh, you sound like us. And I was like, what do you mean? Like the way you speak. And I was like, interesting. And then at the end of my mission there, I just reflected. I was like, I don't remember them saying that to any of my companions. So later, as I learned Hawaiian, I picked up on that accent, the intonation. I immediately just started to make changes, and something that I always tell people to do, because people have pointed it out to me before of my Hawaiian sounds different. I think and I've had people DM me on Instagram and stuff of like it's very reminiscent of all the kupuna that we hear on different recordings, which is very high praise. I am definitely shooting for that. I don't think that and I don't know if I ever will be 100% like sound 100% like them, but that is definitely what I always keep in mind when I speak. Wow, where was I going with that? I've completely lost my thought. Once I start talking about that stuff, I just will go, yeah.
Yeah,
But
he was going down his rabbit hole of sound.
oh, I found it.
Okay, you found it.
Okay, so if you can identify that you sound different than a native speaker, what I started to do was record my voice talking to myself, which may have been another occasion where she heard me. I have recordings of myself years ago doing just that. And sometimes it would be, I would memorize a few sentences that I heard from a speaker and then try to do the exact intonation. And other times, no, when I got better, then I could just tell my own stories of my own life. Sometimes I would just make up one and just practice that intonation. And so something very looked over I found in a lot of languages. But if you want to become a master of a language, you have to adapt the sound.
Yeah. Also, since you brought it up, using recording as a resource is a really great resource. I mean, I can't say like I have recorded my voice a lot, but I have done a lot of videos, mostly because I started very early on sharing our story and posting stuff on social media. So that's a lot of video stuff. And I think that's a great resource because speaking a language is a public thing. So it's very nerve-wracking. You know, number one thing people are afraid of, I don't know where I got this information from, but it's like speaking in public. I think that's the thing. So when you have to use the language in front of people, that's honestly where I think everyone like chokes up and gets nervous. If you practice in front of a camera, because for some reason like having a camera pointed at you kind of has a similar effect of like having people look at you.
True.
I think one, because you know someone could potentially see the video, or two, you might be intending for other people to see the video. So I think it was really helpful for me to get over the shy factor when I was like always filming myself. I didn't share all the videos, but like you have to verbally put it out there, and you got a video going, so it's a little bit of pressure, and then afterwards you watch it and you cringe, and just all of that kind of creates this little environment for you to practice getting over the shy hurdle.
That's very insightful. Yeah. So, I mean, if you're not going to make videos of yourself speaking as you practice and put it out for everybody to see, you can definitely just keep it for yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, my recordings,
delete 'em.
the recordings I took of just my voice, I never put out, except for in an episode of my podcast where I wanted to show people
How different
how
you sound.
different that there was a change. Like, this is me at about a year-ish of learning, and this is me a year after, and there was a very distinct change.
Yeah.
A lot of that had to do with me interacting with native speakers in person, and in that year you can hear a stark difference. It's because I was around them a lot more. It wasn't just me listening to a recording anymore. Now I could hear them in different I don't know, facets of life. Sometimes they would tell me stories. Sometimes they were frustrated, and you'd hear a little bit of that bite come out when they would talk and stuff like that. So you can do it. Record a video, record your voice when you're working on the overall
use
sound.
it as resources. And since you brought up native speakers, that'll be a great resource to talk about next. Above all, the most amazing resource you could possibly use or have available to you, probably sounds better, have available to you is our native speakers. And when we feel like we always have to define this, but when we say native speakers, we mean people who have been raised in the language, meaning it's the language of their home, not necessarily just the language of school, but it's their first language. Their mother or
Parent or
father or
guardian.
whoever's raising them is giving them that language, and they got it from their whoever raised them, and it has come from
An unbroken line of
unbroken
native
line
speakers
of native
of
speakers.
a particular language, specifically Hawaiian that we're talking about.
Yeah. So those sorts of resources, those kupuna, those aunties, uncles, those families are amazing, incredible resources and fountains of knowledge. And the very first time I remember meeting a native speaker was going to school with you one day to meet Ipawang, Dr. Ipawang, and Auntie Lolena. And the reason why we went was I had a question. I'd put something on Instagram. It was is it a ka or a ke? It's for ahupua'a. You know, I put out something saying ka ahupua'a, and someone was like, no, it's ke ahupua'a. So I was like, oh, okay. And then I changed it, and then someone else was like, no, it's ka ahupua'a. And this is back when I was like just barely learning, so I wasn't like claiming that I knew better. So I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know which one is it. So I went with Malu to school because I was like, maybe I can ask native speakers. And I was so nervous. I was so nervous to meet Dr. Ipawang and Tutu Lolena. And because I knew it was all going to be in Hawaiian. I don't know how I knew that. Well, I think at that point you were conversing with everyone all in Hawaiian.
I mean, I worked with Ipo in the office. She was the head of the Hawaiian language department at UH Manoa. So every day was...
Yeah.
That's specifically why I wanted that job, too. I wanted to be around speakers.
Yeah.
And... I mean, it was a huge blessing. She was the head of the department at the time. She was in the office, and I got to just
spitting. She was just...
Yeah, she would come in the mornings with her breakfast. If she had to heat it up, she would, and she'd sit down. She's like, "Oh, I was
in English?
No.
Oh.
It was all in Hawaiian. Specifically, she's from Niihau, so the T's and the K's together, which I had to get used to. At first, it was pretty hard to understand, but. Yeah, she'd just sit there, tell a story. Sometimes it was like, oh, my grandkid is doing this the other day. It got me so pissed off. Or I was on the road, and there was this guy on the side of the road doing this.
Like she'd be saying
all these things.
Hawaii.
Yeah, all in Hawaiian. I mean, it's... Anyways, so yeah, it was always going to be Hawaiian language.
Okay, so...
when you were going to go to the school and visit.
So I remember going. I was so nervous. Never met a native speaker before. Honestly, before we learned Hawaiian, I didn't even know they existed, which is crazy. Growing up in Hawaii, you just don't hear about it. So we got ready, had our kids, went to the school, and right when I met her, she was so nice to me. Like I just remember, like when I think back on the memory, I just remember feeling so much relief and surprise that she was so accepting of my Hawaiian. Like I was trying to speak to her, and she was so encouraging, and she wasn't like correcting me every 5 seconds, like. She understood what I was saying, and then, was talking to me and treating me like a real person. And it was such a cool experience. And then we met Auntie Lolena after. But it was such an amazing experience because I was like, whoa, why am I so afraid to use my language and to meet these speakers? They want me to speak. They want me to learn.
Maybe that's a good point to touch on. You specifically had experiences of non-native speakers, but Hawaiians that had learned it as a second language and were very, what's the word?
What is the word?
I mean, they weren't kind. What's the word? Is there a word for it? Nails. Nails. What are the words? Highly critical. Highly critical. Some of them not encouraging. Some of them are just rude about it.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I mean, that has to do a little bit of why you felt that way. Because you had already had experiences with speakers who would just try to correct you every 5 seconds. Whereas when you spoke with a native speaker, they just let you go. They definitely know when it's wrong and when it's right. But they didn't really,
They were less focused on the language and more just focused on
your ability
the conversation.
Well, it was less about the structure and the proper usage of words. It was just... I can understand what you're saying. It's a little funny. And that was it. It was just the main... It was,
it was like
what a language is... The purpose of a language is to communicate and be understood. Yeah. So that's kind of exactly what the experience was for you, right?
Thank you for sharing what the
experience was. And I have summed it up.
Was for me.
Perfectly.
Perfect. So yeah, we always say, always, like, if you have access if you have the opportunity to learn from native speakers, they do it. Yes, enough said there. Perfect. And we're so grateful to the people who have helped us learn.
I have one thing to add on.
Okay, add on.
Yeah, learn from them. My own personal opinion is, I mean, not everybody is going to be able to do that. So you'll most likely have to get knowledge from a second language speaker, and always look for the best, obviously. So, what was I going to say? But for like day-to-day, everyday usage, the most practical usage of the language, yeah, native speakers hands down. And I've just seen, speaking with the best of second language speakers compared to native speakers, there's just a chasm between the two. A native speaker just can explain and express and talk about any given topic with just complete ease because of their knowledge base and because of how comfortable they are. It's your first language. A second language speaker will most likely always have a bit of a barrier to break through every time they venture into a new topic of discussion, something that they're not as familiar with. So, yeah, if you can't access them in person, I mean, you have recordings. You have Kaleo Hawaii. You have Clinton Kanahere collection. Videos, a few online that are available.
And going to school is, I mean, I didn't go to school, but Malu went to school.
UH Manoa has at least 2 employees that are native speakers right now.
Yeah, so that is a real benefit of school, is getting those contacts and being able to meet those people. Okay, so moving on to, I wanted to touch on Pukewehewehe because...
Oh, that's a great one.
I know it's a great one. So Pukewehewehe, the Hawaiian Language Dictionary by Mary Kavena Pukui. For a second there, I thought it was switched. And then it was written by, was it her and someone else too, or just her?
Yeah, I mean, it was Mary Kavena Pukui leading it, and Samuel Elbert,
oh, that's what I thought,
who was a linguist, helped her.
So they wrote this Hawaiian Language Dictionary, compiled words from all across the islands. I can't imagine what a huge task that.
She had to physically travel.
So amazing.
To gather all those words.
And I'm bringing it up because initially, like, this was Malu's, like, if he was looking at his phone, it was because he was on vehevehe.org all the time. Is it .org or .com?
Yeah, vehevehe.org.
Yeah,
it's where you can access
all
the
time. And I think maybe just a little less now, but like initially the first couple years, like,
it's a lot less now.
He would be like going from word to word to word for 10, 20 minutes at a time. I would get like mad at him because I'm like, what are you, like, talk to me? What are you doing on our date? You've been on your phone for like 25 minutes and all you're doing is reading words.
It was when we would be watching a film and they would say something like,
oh, it was not anything.
It was so sporadic. And I was like, oh, is there a word for that?
Hanging out with friends. It didn't matter what it was.
Okay.
If you heard a word, you would start looking it up and look. And
yeah, I'd go down the rabbit hole, one word to the next word to the next word.
So let's talk about that rabbit hole, because you would look up one word and then what was the rabbit hole? Why?
Yeah.
What would happen?
Well, it's just like the way that thoughts work, right? The way that your brain works is like, I had a thought of, maybe the word was exciting. And then I'd be reading up on exciting. And then I was like, exciting. I was excited about watching this film. What's the word for this word that was in that film? And then just like on and on and on of somehow my mind made a connection between this word and another word. So I'd look up that word.
Yeah, and also in Phuket...
It was not very effective, by the way. That it was just... I would just look up words. I mean, I would look up so many words per day. It's not possible for me to memorize them.
I wouldn't say it's not effective, though, because you're very good with your words now, so maybe that could have played a part in it. I think it's the habit.
I just mean...
Don't say it's not effective. I'd say, like, even the habit building of looking up the vocabulary was effective. It's good.
But if you're going to look up, like, 50 words in a sitting, I don't think it's too effective. I don't know.
Okay, well, here's what I would say. I would say if you're interested, then do it. If it's not interesting to you, then maybe be more strategic, because, like, for me, if you told me I have to look up 50 words, I'm not going to remember any of them. But if I'm, like, out at the park with my kids and there's, like, 50 new words, like what slide, what swing, what's grass, I'm going to look those up and then I'm going to remember them because in the context. So I would say it could be effective to look up a lot of words, but only if you want to, like only if the desire is there. But I was gonna say with pukevehevehe,
forcing yourself to do something. I don't know how well that ever works, but yeah.
Well, works for some people. With pukevehevehe, with the rabbit hole, a lot of times the way this one works is if you put in a word, it'll give you a few, maybe even many words for that one word. So I do think another reason why you went down the rabbit hole was it'd be like, what's the word for smell? And then there's like 50 words for smell. So then you have to click on every single one and read all the different definitions. And then you can even further look into all those definitions. So
yeah, that's true. Wow, you remember these things. Yeah.
I observed you learning the language.
She was not looking up words at the pace that I was.
Not at the pace, but I did occasionally, and now even more so, I do look up words. It's good. It's a good thing to do, for sure. Okay, we are. Wow, that went by really quickly.
Yeah, 30 minutes already.
I know. So we got using it, talking to people as resources. Yeah, I think we covered a lot of the biggest resources that we used.
I think just to add on to what you said about being interested, yeah, if you're not interested in searching all those words or resource, yeah, I would just, triple down on what you really enjoy. So I really, even in my first language, love to learn words. So I naturally gravitated to that dictionary. I would just pour through it for hours. But I also have a good ear. I've had a good ear with music and things like that, and I enjoy listening. I also like to watch things. Unfortunately, there's not too much like native speaker material, and that's what I always wanted. But so I would just, really heavy on both of those. Listening. Not heavy on writing at all. But you might be a writer. So
we didn't even talk about writing.
Writing might be writing and or reading. Yeah, I mean, not a big reader.
Talk about reading.
Not a big reader, but in some of the newspapers, there's really interesting stories, which
we didn't even talk about the newspapers. Here, give a shout out for newspapers as a resource.
Papakilo Database is the place to go for newspapers, Hawaiian language newspapers that were put out from about 1834 to 1943-ish. Yeah. I can't remember exactly, but it's about a 100-year span.
I think we probably didn't bring up newspapers because I'm thinking way back.
Like first year.
And we didn't really start using newspapers until later on. And even for me, it's even more recently where I can actually understand them, that I enjoy reading them.
Yeah, because you have to come at,
you have to be at a certain level to understand the newspapers. Otherwise, it's like, for me,
you'll just get a headache immediately.
Really, it's really hard.
Some of it can be very intricate and complex, so it can get really frustrating when you're in the early stages. But definitely when you're at a proficient level, then I would say start opening it. Opening up those newspapers. They're online. That's the great thing about like all these resources is they're online
and free.
So I've had a lot of people reach out to me on TikTok and Instagram of like, where can I find these resources? Where can I buy a course? I'm like, we did it virtually free. We became proficient we spent $3. The Pukea Moromono was $3. So $6 each. Right? It was $3 each. So we became proficient off of that within a year. That book, and we had
of the $3, not off
the $3, and a few other books that were online.
Resources that we found.
Spoken Hawaiian, the Hawaiian language book, a complete grammar book. It was all free. And
then meeting people was free.
Yeah. So I don't know. I always push people to do that. Everybody's like looking. If you're looking to spend money, you don't really need to.
Maybe not if you're just starting out.
So anyway, so I wanted to touch on really interest. So pull to whatever you're interested in. If you're interested in listening, more interested in writing, more interested in reading, speaking, and working on talking to yourself in the shower like I did and stuff like that. Just make sure it's fun. Make sure it's interesting for you. If learning's not fun, you'll just give up on it.
Yeah.
Just like anything else. Exercising. Oh, it's not fun. Well, then you most likely are not going to do it. Take a friend. Maybe that'll make it fun. Learn it with somebody.
That's the fun thing about language is you can make it fun because language is a part of every single thing that we do as humans every single day. So there is going to be some aspect of learning the language that will appeal to you. And so make it individual, make it personal, and find a way to make it interesting so you stick with it. Because the other things will come. You just have to establish some sort of habit of learning the language. And the other things will come.
Just got to start.
Just got to start,
Just got to start and keep going.
So jump into those resources this week. And thanks for tuning in to Hawaiian at Home.